I think we're ready to start, and I think our first speaker on the agenda is Diane Riddle with the State Water Board. So,
good morning. Again, I'm Diane Riddle. I'm the Environmental Program Manager for the State Water Board's Bay Delta program. I'll provide you some background information about the State Water Board, its various roles and responsibilities, and our current Bay Delta planning activities to help inform your review. Okay, there we go. All right. So to start, I'll explain a little bit about the State Water Board and the role that we play. The mission of the State Water Board is to preserve, enhance, and restore the quality of California's water resources and ensure their proper allocation and efficient use for the benefit of present and future generations. These two authorities converge in the Bay Delta and with the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, as you'll find. So with the dual authorities for protection of the State Water Board's beneficial uses, the State Water Board provides comprehensive protection of California's waters referred to as beneficial uses. These uses include municipal, industrial, agricultural, environmental, and recreational uses. In protecting beneficial uses, the State Water Board must balance all of these competing uses for water along with economic considerations and other factors. Water quality control plans are the foundation for the state and regional water quality control boards' activities to protect beneficial uses, including the water quality control plan for the Bay Delta, which is the subject of this workshop. The Bay Delta plan, like other water quality control plans, identifies beneficial uses of water to be protected, water quality objectives for the protection of those beneficial uses, a program of implementation that describes how the water quality objectives will be implemented by the State Water Board and other entities, and monitoring and special studies measures needed to evaluate the effectiveness of the water quality objectives and the protection of beneficial uses. The water quality objectives in the Bay Delta Plan are primarily flow-dependent water quality objectives and were in the past largely designed to protect beneficial uses in the Delta from the effects of the operations of the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project. Pursuant to state law, water quality control plans are required to be reviewed periodically, and pursuant to federal law, they are required to be reviewed every 3 years. Water quality control plans are not self-implementing, but must be implemented through other measures, including water right requirements in the case of the Bay Delta Plan. So the review of the Bay Delta Plan is the first step in implementing operational changes that will be needed to protect beneficial uses in the Bay Delta. So the history of the State Water Board's water quality and flow activities in the Bay Delta dates back to the 1960s when the State Water Board and its predecessor, the State Water Rights Board, issued water rights for the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project that included the first water quality requirements for the Delta to prevent large upstream projects from impacting downstream beneficial uses in the Delta, and reserved jurisdiction to revisit these requirements. I won't go over all of these different decisions over the years unless someone has a particular interest in them, but over the years the State Water Board took various actions to modify the Bay Delta Plan and to establish water right requirements to implement the Bay Delta Plan. More recently, in 1995, the State Water Board adopted a Bay Delta Plan, which is largely the current Bay Delta Plan. That plan was implemented in 2000 in Water Rights Decision 1641. The State Water Board then reviewed the 1995 Bay Delta Plan In 2006, it made minor modifications to the Bay Delta Plan, but nothing really substantive. Instead, the board identified a number of emerging issues that should be addressed in the future, including the pelagic organism decline, climate change, salinity, and San Joaquin River flows. And that's some of the issues that we'll be addressing in our current review. Then in 2010, pursuant to the 2009 Delta Reform Act, the State Water Board developed non-regulatory flow criteria needed to protect fish and wildlife in the Bay Delta ecosystem to inform the Bay Delta conservation planning efforts and the State Water Board's own planning activities. These flow criteria were developed without balancing the needs of fish and wildlife with other beneficial uses, without considering cold water pool needs for salmonids, and without considering economics and other factors. All of those other factors I should mention will be considered in the State Water Board's current review of the Bay Delta Plan. So I just wanted to highlight that that's the difference, or a major distinguishing factor between the 2010 Delta Flow Criteria Report and our current review efforts. So on to the conclusions of the 2010 Delta Flow Criteria Report. The State Water Board concluded that flow and habitat measures are needed to protect fish and wildlife in the Bay Delta, but that flow and habitat are not interchangeable. The report also found that current flows are insufficient to protect public trust resources. The report further determined that more flow of a more natural pattern was needed in the Bay Delta at certain times to protect beneficial uses. And those flow criteria that were included in the report were based on a percent of unimpaired flow approach. So the report found that 75% of delta outflow from January through June would be protective, 75% of unimpaired Sacramento inflow from November through June would be protective, and 60% of unimpaired San Joaquin River flow from February through June. In comparison, historic flows over the last 18 to 22 years have been approximately 30% in dry years to almost 100% of unimpaired flow in wetter years for delta outflow, about 50% on average from April through June for Sacramento River flows, and approximately 20% in dry years to almost 50% in wetter years for San Joaquin River inflows. Other criteria included in the Delta Flow Criteria Report were increased fall delta outflows in wet and above normal years, fall pulse flows on the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers, and flow criteria in the Delta to help to protect fish from mortality in the central and southern Delta resulting from operations of the state and federal water project export facilities. The report also included determinations regarding variability in the natural hydrograph, floodplain activation, and other habitat improvements, water quality and contaminants, cold water pool management, and adaptive management. So now I'll go over our current Bay Delta planning activities. The State Water Board is currently conducting a phased review of the Bay Delta plan to establish flow requirements for the Bay Delta and priority tributaries to the Delta. The first phase of that review is focused on San Joaquin River flows and southern Delta salinity and the program of implementation for those flows. The second phase, which is the subject of today's workshop, is the comprehensive update to the remainder of the Bay Delta plan. The Phase 3 process is the implementation process for Phases 1 and 2. So essentially, that would largely be the process to modify water rights or other requirements to assure that the water quality objectives identified in Phases 1 and 2 are implemented. The Phase 4 process is to develop flow requirements and to implement those flow requirements for priority tributaries to the Bay Delta. So as for the timing for the Bay Delta planning activities, this is generally the timeline that we're working with, although it has been impacted to some extent by drought activities. we're anticipating completing Phase 1 in the near future, followed by Phase 2 sometime in 2016, and then Phase 3 sometime after that, depending on how other activities work out in the Bay Delta. And then the tributary work would proceed on various timelines. So shown on the screen is the list of the different issues the State Water Board intends to address in the comprehensive review of the Bay Delta Plan. Some of these issues pertain to today's discussion, including the export inflow objectives, Delta cross-channel gate closures, reverse flows on Old and Middle River flows, and the other factors are also, I think, related to today's discussion. So I'll provide you with a little bit of background for how we got here today. In the fall of 2012, the State Water Board held a series of workshops to inform the State Water Board's comprehensive review of the Bay Delta Plan. The workshop included presentations from expert panels and stakeholder groups on a number of issues, including fisheries and modeling. The findings from the workshop, as Peter pointed out, were summarized in a report by Dr. Brock Bernstein. The report summarized the areas of agreement, disagreement, and uncertainty. Following the release of the workshop summary report, the State Water Board requested input from the Delta Science Program and others regarding next steps in the State Water Board's review process. The DSP recommended that the State Water Board hold this workshop in Delta flows, and also another workshop that we had in February on Delta outflows and related stressors to address some of the uncertainties surrounding the different issues the State Water Board is currently reviewing. The information from these workshops will inform the State Water Board's update of the Bay Delta Plan, the comprehensive review effort. So the scientific basis report is planned for release later this year. That schedule is being somewhat impacted by the drought again, but we're looking to release it before the end of the year. After release of the scientific basis report, the State Water Board will hold a workshop to receive input on the report and will make any needed changes based on that input. The State Water Board will also submit that report for independent scientific peer review required by the Health and Safety Code. The scientific basis report will then inform potential changes to the Bay Delta Plan. And the State Water Board will then hold another hearing and opportunity for comment on the update to the Bay Delta Plan, the environmental documentation for that. So there'll be numerous opportunities for the public to provide input on information that's developed through this process and other information that's included in the review of the Bay Delta Plan. So with that, I think that summarizes the State Water Board's activities. I can take any questions you might have.
Yeah, we have time for a few questions.
Thank you, Diane. This is sort of a complicated question, and it gets at to the structure of the science that you would like to see. When you think about a science program, it's comprised of all these little pieces where individual scientists work. Then you have to go through a phase in which you integrate and synthesize all that information and hopefully drive a comprehensive and compelling rationale to support a decision. I found that it works really well if the decision makers, which I assume you might be a representative of, let their expectations be known to the scientific community, because there is an infinite number of ways of integrating and synthesizing all the individual studies. So have you gone through a process in which you've educated the scientific community and maybe let them know what your expectations are of the data and conclusions that they're making, so to make sure that what they're doing is on target and actually meets your needs?
That's definitely something we've been thinking about in this process, and something that we're planning to address more fully than we have in the past in our update efforts, to have a more rigorous, regular review process, such that there's not these 10, 15-year gaps between the review and the synthesis of the information and the connection between science and the policymakers, our board, when making these decisions. That's something we're working on in our Phase 1 process, to add yearly and then yearly reviews for updates to our board and communication between the scientific community and our board, coupled with synthesis reports on a more regular basis that inform both adaptive management in the Bay Delta Plan. In the past, the Bay Delta Plan has been fairly rigid. We're planning in the next update of the Bay Delta Plan to have a more adaptive framework, such that we can make changes on a real-time basis. It's difficult for us under the construct we have of the Bay Delta Plan now to make real-time changes to respond to emergencies and other issues like this drought. So we're planning to make sure we incorporate that into the planning process for all of our phases now, to have more regular updates, more synthesis, and more dialogue between the board and the scientists, in addition to incorporate the Delta Science Program and other independent bodies into our review efforts, to assure that we're getting, that further level of review, nonpartisan level of review.
One question.
Bruce would like to tag on to that if you're...
Oh.
One of the major groups that are doing science in the Delta is the Interagency Ecological Program, of which the Science Board the State Board is a member. And there's at least quarterly meetings of the directors of the 9 agencies, which includes the Bureau, DWR, and most of the major players, including EPA. And they set the stage for what is going to get funded. And we have RFPs that go out periodically, and the questions in those RFPs are set by the directors and coordinators of the Interagency Ecological Program. So there's been a improving and pretty good, I think, connection between we'll pay you if you do this. And there's also been a lot of work in the last 10 years of integrating all the little pieces into some sort of synthetic documents.
And I can maybe add on to that a little bit. The board has the authority to require studies, which is a little bit unique from the Bureau of Reclamation, the Department of Water Resources. The fishery agencies, to some extent, have that ability. So I think we have a little more flexibility, and we're open to suggestions on what kind of monitoring we should be conducting and evaluation analysis that we should be including as part of our update that we should be requiring of water right holders and others.
Just to also add to that, John, I think you raised a critical point. I mean, in all of these big programs, that's a challenge. So as well as the 2 efforts which you just heard about, the whole formation of the Delta Stewardship Council was intended to get at that. And as part of that, there's an interagency implementation committee that met for the first time last week. It's online, that I think had something like 16 agency directors participating in those discussions. So yes, you really hit the nail on the head, but there are these forums for different aspects of this complex system that have been developed specifically to address that.
Okay. My question was, you have this review, you had a review of Delta outflows, similar structured thing that Kenny was also involved with. How do these connect or not to what you did in 2010?
So as a result of our 2010 report, the science underlying that report was discussed at these workshops that we had in 2012, and there was an expression that there was still a lot of uncertainty regarding the different issues that were discussed. So we're hoping that this workshop will help to bring some certainty, or at least scientific consensus regarding different issues that were not agreed upon in that process. So we're looking for an unbiased analysis of the information that we've had presented to the board. Generally, the State Water Board's workshops, the representatives that appear before the board are representing different stakeholder groups and have a different point of view and a different angle on things. The board has all of this conflicting information presented to it. and often has a question about, well, is this truly the case? Is there truly this amount of uncertainty regarding these issues? Or is this kind of a posturing issue? And we're hoping that this review process will help to bring some clarity to the validity of the science that was presented to the board and that can be used in the board's planning processes.
Can I ask a follow-on question before I push the red button again? What, in your mind, how do you view, this is something we discussed when we talked on the phone, different kinds of evidence. There are evidence that are in different levels of prestige, peer-reviewed journals, there are reports, there are PowerPoint presentations, there's a conversation in the hall. How does the board weigh those different kinds of things in terms of your decision-making?
All of that information can inform the State Water Board's decision. The more robust the information, the more weight that information holds to the board. So, although the other information can also inform what are the additional analyses and studies and work that we should be doing to, evaluate other issues that are raised.
The State Water Resources Control Board is obligated to balance a whole range of sometimes conflicting beneficial uses of water. So the science input that we might have here is only one of the considerations you take into account in building your final plan. So I'm just wondering, how do you deal with those very complicated trade-offs? Do you have a formal process, or is it sort of committee-based? How exactly do you decide between certain beneficial uses of water in order to balance this?
This is an issue that comes up fairly frequently. There's no formula for balancing. It's a policy determination by the various board members. They weigh the information, the scientific information, with the different policy considerations, the public interest, economic consideration, the balancing of the different beneficial uses, and make a policy determination on those issues.
So could I then ask, is there a sort of, public recording of this process of balancing, or is it pretty much done behind closed doors?
When the board adopts, the board's processes are all very public. Information can be submitted at any time along the process, and the board will respond to comments at various venues. We're required to respond in certain parts of our process. The board also, every decision before the board is made in public. And all of the discussion between the board members is had in public. So they'll have that discussion at the board meeting. They'll hear from the different stakeholder groups, and all of that occurs before the public. As for how the board records their decisions regarding balancing, that is generally included in the resolution adopting the Bay Delta Plan update, or other information can be included in other documents, the environmental document. It's spread throughout the different pieces of information that contribute to the process, but I think a lot of the discussion takes place in the board meeting process to adopt the Bay Delta Plan, and much of that information is then recorded in the resolution that adopts the Bay Delta Plan.
So this just, in a sense, follows on from what Steve was asking. You get, from the scientific side, you're going to get input that comes from a variety of sources, everything from peer-reviewed publications in prestigious journals to hall-room conversations. So, did I turn off, or am I still on?
I think you turned off.
Anyway, pushing the red button. There we go. It's obviously like a scientific paper. It's on and off, right? And I'm just wondering, again, and you sort of responded to Steve's, but you not only have to balance the competing demands for water, but you also have to make some decision about the strength of the scientific information, and it surely can't be just based on assessments by people like us. Do you have some kind of internal process for how you're going to weigh the results of certain kinds of science against other competing uses?
Yeah, like I mentioned, the information from this workshop and other information from the literature and information we've received in our workshop process and in our planning processes will be incorporated in our scientific basis report, in which we'll lay out the scientific rationale for proposed changes to the Bay Delta Plan. And, again, we'll evaluate the strength of that information in determining how it should contribute to informing the Bay Delta Plan. And that will all be made public, and the public will then have an opportunity to comment on the scientific basis report before the board. Again, then that scientific basis report will undergo scientific peer review as required by the Public Health and Safety Code. And then that information will be included in our environmental documentation for the Bay Delta Plan update, in which people will also have an opportunity to comment. So, we've got a team of scientists and engineers that are putting together the information to support the Bay Delta Plan update, who are evaluating the strength of the scientific information, and will, speak to that when developing the scientific basis report, and will definitely look to that strength in determining how useful the information is for informing the Bay Delta Plan update. That's, again, also part of what we're looking for from this group is some, your opinions on the strength of the information that should inform our review process.
Maybe one really quick one.
Sorry, I'd just like a quick comment from you then. There's a whole range of sort of operational research or multi-attribute decision-making processes that sort of formalize the way in which you might incorporate different kinds of information into the kinds of decisions you have to make. Do you think those would be useful to the process that you have to go through?
Yeah, definitely. You're referring to other guidelines for how to look at scientific literature and gray science and those processes as far as how they should be incorporated in our planning efforts?
Well, no, I'm talking about techniques of what are called multi-attribute analysis, where you have a whole range of considerations to somehow combine into a meaningful decision, and each of those considerations may be given a different weight in your analysis, and you may have sort of specific models or conceptual models for combining them, and so that it provides a formal process for showing other people how you have actually incorporated each of these considerations into your final decision.
Yeah, certainly that would be informative to the process. I think we acknowledge that there will always be a level of uncertainty, and our goal in moving forward with our Bay Delta planning activities is to structure the water quality control plan objectives in a way that we can learn something from what we're currently doing and make changes based on what we've learned on a real-time basis, rather than, waiting to make those decisions for the next review process in 10 or 15 years. Well, we're required to review the Bay Delta plan every 3 years. Realistically, a real comprehensive review effort is probably on the order of every 10 to 15 years. So we're trying to both deal with the uncertainty that we know will always exist and respond to that, and respond to the real on-the-ground conditions that we're experiencing with our structuring of the Bay Delta plan. And we're happy to receive any input that this panel may have in doing so.
That sounds like a good opportunity for a recommendation from the panel. Next talk.